Rachel's heart pounded as the cries of her newborn twins filled the small hospital room. Sweat glistened on her forehead, her body trembling from exhaustion, yet her mind was racing in ways she hadn't expected. The doctor's face, which had been calm and composed moments before, now carried a hint of confusion. No, more than that. His eyes widened as he looked from one baby to the next. The first twin, a little girl with soft brown skin and a shock of dark hair, lay peacefully in her arms. But the second child, still nestled in the nurse's embrace, had skin so light it almost matched Rachel's. For a moment, she didn't understand what was happening. How could this be? She glanced over at her husband, Mark, standing stiff by the window, staring out at the parking lot, as though the trees had more to say than his newborn children. He had barely looked at her during labor. She had assumed it was nerves, but now his silence felt ominous. "Mrs. Davis," the nurse's voice cut through the tension. "Your babies are healthy," but she hesitated. "There's something you need to know." Rachel's chest tightened. She looked at the nurse, then back at her babies. The truth was about to surface. She could feel it. She reached for her phone, her hands shaking as she texted a single message to her mother. "It's happening." Later that night, the sterile silence of the hospital room was broken only by the soft murmurs of the machines. Mark was gone. He had left without a word, and Rachel knew exactly why. He had known all along. The affair she had suspected for months wasn't just a fleeting dalliance. It was the key to this impossible situation. As she held her white-skinned baby in one arm and her brown-skinned baby in the other, the truth came crashing down like a wave she couldn't avoid. Mark's affair hadn't been with just anyone. It had been with her best friend, Carla, a woman Rachel had trusted with everything. She had wondered why Carla had disappeared 6 months into her pregnancy, but she never imagined it was because of Mark. Before we dive into this fascinating story, please share a comment with the community, letting us know where you're watching from. Rachel's tears slipped silently down her cheeks as the nurse stood by, offering no words of comfort. There was nothing to say. Her life had just shattered in the most unthinkable way, and now she faced an impossible decision. How could she raise these twins, knowing the truth? Would they ever be accepted? Could they be loved? The nurse returned with a clipboard, offering a gentle but firm reminder. "We need to know what to do next." Rachel stared at the blank form in front of her. She was supposed to fill in the names of her daughters, but her mind was numb, her hands trembling as they hovered over the paper. Her heart split in two, torn between fear and love. Mark was gone, probably forever. Carla had vanished from her life months ago. She was utterly alone in this, and the weight of it felt like a crushing burden. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered to herself. The nurse, empathetic but professional, offered no direct answers, only the words Rachel dreaded hearing. "Sometimes it's about what's best for the children, not what's easy." Rachel knew exactly what that meant. The societal pressure, the questions, the stares. It wouldn't be long before people noticed. She knew how small towns worked. The secret wouldn't stay hidden for long, and her daughters, her innocent, beautiful daughters, would bear the brunt of it. A black and white set of twins? In this town? It was then that Rachel made the hardest decision of her life. She signed the papers that would separate them. One would stay with her, and the other would be placed in the adoption system. The only solace was the hope that the other daughter would find a family who would love her. Time passed, and Rachel's decision haunted her every day. She raised Emily, her white daughter, as best as she could. Emily grew into a bright, loving child, unaware of the secret that hung in the air like a heavy cloud. She knew nothing of her twin or the reasons behind her father's absence. Rachel kept herself busy with work, with life, anything to distract from the gnawing guilt that ate away at her. She watched Emily laugh and play, but with each year that passed, she wondered about the other daughter, Kayla. What kind of life was she living? Did she look like her? Did she laugh the same way? It wasn't until Emily was in high school that the past began to resurface. One evening, as Rachel was cooking dinner, Emily burst into the kitchen, excitement lighting up her face. "Mom, guess what?" Emily held up her phone. "I did one of those DNA tests for school, and it came back today. I have a match, someone who's listed as my sister." Rachel's heart stopped. "What do you mean, a match?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "A sister. She's just a few hours away in the same state. Can you believe that?" Rachel felt the ground beneath her feet shift. She gripped the counter to steady herself as a cold wave of dread washed over her. It was happening. The past she had buried was about to come roaring back, whether she was ready or not. Rachel stood frozen in the kitchen, the weight of her daughter's words hitting her like a tidal wave. Sister. The word echoed in her mind. She had spent years keeping this secret, hoping that time would bury it forever. But now, it was unraveling before her eyes. "Mom?" Emily's voice was filled with excitement, but there was also confusion at the lack of response. "Did you hear me? I have a sister. Isn't that crazy?" Rachel slowly turned, forcing a weak smile. "Yes, honey, that's something," she managed to say, her voice trembling. She could feel her pulse racing, her mind grasping for a way to keep everything from crumbling. But she knew, deep down, this was inevitable. Emily continued, oblivious to her mother's panic. "I sent her a message through the app. We're going to meet up this weekend. Can you believe it? After all these years, I have a sister out there." She laughed, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside Rachel. Rachel's throat went dry. "What do I do?" She thought frantically. The truth was about to surface, and she wasn't ready. But could she ever truly be ready for this? "Emily," Rachel said slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "There's something I need to tell you." Before she could continue, the sound of Emily's phone buzzing interrupted her. Emily glanced down at the screen, her face lighting up even more. "It's her! She just responded. She wants to meet tomorrow." Rachel's heart plummeted. Tomorrow. It was happening so fast. Later that evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Rachel sat alone in the living room, the silence pressing in around her. The weight of the past, the lies, the choices she had made, everything felt heavier now, suffocating her. She picked up her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed a familiar number. It rang twice before a voice answered. Mom? Rachel's mother, Betty, had been her only confidant during the nightmare of those early days. She had been there when Rachel made the agonizing choice to give up Kayla, urging her to do what she thought was best for the children. But now, everything was about to come crashing down. "Mom, it's happening," Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. Emily found her. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a deep sigh. "I knew this day would come," Betty said softly. "I hoped it wouldn't, but I knew." "What am I supposed to do?" Rachel asked, her voice full of desperation. "She doesn't know. How do I tell her that I gave up her sister? That I chose?" Betty's voice was calm but firm. "Rachel, you have to tell her the truth. You can't keep this secret any longer. It's time." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She had spent 2 decades running from this moment. Now, there was no more running. The next day, Rachel drove Emily to the small cafe where she was set to meet Kayla. Emily chattered excitedly in the passenger seat, but Rachel barely heard her. Her mind was consumed by the enormity of what was about to happen. As they pulled up to the cafe, Rachel's heart raced. Through the window, she could see a young woman sitting at a table. She was beautiful, tall with deep brown skin and long curls that framed her face. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Kayla, the daughter she hadn't seen since that fateful day in the hospital. "Is that her?" Emily asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "She looks just like you, Mom." Rachel felt a pang of guilt. "She looks just like you too, Emily," she thought, but couldn't bring herself to say. Instead, she nodded. "Yes, that's her." Emily practically jumped out of the car, eager to meet her sister. Rachel stayed behind for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady herself. She watched as Emily approached Kayla, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions: joy, fear, regret. But when she saw Kayla's face light up as Emily introduced herself, Rachel's guilt deepened. This was the moment her daughters were finally meeting, but it wasn't the joyful reunion it should have been. It was overshadowed by the lie she had carried for so long. After a few minutes, Emily waved Rachel over, urging her to join them. Rachel's legs felt like lead as she walked toward the cafe. Her heart pounded in her chest, the fear of what was to come overwhelming her. As she approached the table, Kayla's eyes met hers. There was no recognition, no warmth, only confusion and perhaps a hint of suspicion. "Hi, I'm Rachel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kayla's gaze didn't waver. I know who you are, she said flatly. There was no emotion in her voice, only cold distance. Rachel swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. I'm sorry. Kayla raised an eyebrow. Sorry for what? Rachel's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment she had dreaded for 20 years. I'm sorry for giving you up, for not being there, for not telling Emily sooner. Emily's face, which had been filled with excitement moments ago, now showed shock and confusion. Wait, what do you mean giving her up? Rachel turned to her, tears streaming down her face. Emily, there's so much I haven't told you. When you were born, you had a sister, Kayla. I wasn't strong enough to keep both of you. I made a terrible mistake. Emily's face drained of color. You gave her up? And you never told me? Rachel nodded, her heart breaking. I thought I was doing what was best for both of you, but I was wrong. Kayla's face hardened. You were wrong? She repeated, her voice laced with anger. That's all you have to say? You gave me up like I was nothing, and now you're sorry? Rachel's tears flowed freely now. I didn't know what else to do. I was scared. I thought you'd have a better life with someone else. Kayla stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. A better life? You think growing up without knowing who I really am was a better life? You think watching my adoptive parents struggle to make ends meet was better than being with my real family? Rachel shook her head, her heart breaking. I never meant for any of this to happen. I made the wrong choice, but I've thought about you every single day. I've wanted to reach out, but I didn't know how. Kayla's eyes blazed with fury. Well, it's too late for that now, isn't it? Emily sat in stunned silence, her world spinning. She had grown up believing she knew everything about her family, only to find out she had been living a lie. Her mother had kept something so massive from her, something that had shaped both her life and Kayla's. How could you do this, Mom? Emily asked, her voice trembling. How could you lie to me all these years? Rachel's heart broke at the pain in her daughter's voice. I'm so sorry, Emily. I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you to be hurt by the truth. Emily shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. But you did hurt me. You hurt both of us. The cafe had grown quiet around them, the hum of conversations and clinking dishes fading into the background as the weight of the moment pressed down on Rachel, Kayla, and Emily. The tension in the air was palpable. Rachel sat frozen, her heart aching as she looked at her daughters, each struggling with the revelations that had torn their world apart. Kayla stood, her fists clenched by her sides, her jaw tight with the anger she had harbored for years. Emily's eyes were wide, her face pale, as she tried to make sense of everything she had just learned. The woman she had trusted, her mother, had lied to her for her entire life. I can't believe this, Emily whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. I thought we were a family. How could you hide this from me? Rachel's voice cracked as she spoke, her words barely audible. I didn't know how to tell you. I was ashamed, and I was scared of losing you. Kayla's eyes flashed with anger as she took a step closer to the table, her voice sharp. You lost me a long time ago. The words cut through Rachel like a blade. She wanted to reach out to Kayla, to somehow explain the impossible choices she had made all those years ago. But there was nothing she could say to make it right, nothing that could undo the pain she had caused. Emily, still reeling from the shock, looked between her mother and Kayla. We're supposed to be sisters, she said softly, her voice filled with hurt. But I don't even know you. Kayla's eyes softened for a moment, and she glanced at Emily. I didn't know about you either. I didn't know why I was given away, why I wasn't wanted, but now I do. Rachel stood, unable to bear the distance between herself and her daughters any longer. I wanted you both, she said, her voice shaking. I loved you both, but I was too weak to face the world. I thought I was doing what was best for you. I thought you'd have a better life without me. Kayla's face hardened again. That's not your choice to make. You gave me away like I was nothing, and you kept her, she said, gesturing to Emily. You kept the one who looked like you. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The truth was laid bare now. She had made a choice that had defined all their lives, and it had been the wrong one. Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Stop, she said, her voice shaking. Stop fighting. This is insane. We're all hurt, but this isn't helping. Rachel and Kayla both looked at her, their anger momentarily silenced by the raw emotion in Emily's voice. "We need to talk about this," Emily continued, her hands trembling. "We need to figure this out, not tear each other apart." Kayla shook her head, her voice bitter. "There's nothing to figure out. She made her choice a long time ago." Rachel took a step toward her, her eyes pleading. "Please, Kayla, please let me explain. Let me try to make this right." Kayla's face twisted with pain, and for a moment, it seemed as though she might walk away. But then she turned back, her voice low and filled with anguish. "How? How do you make something like this right?" The air was thick with tension as Kayla sat down, reluctantly allowing Rachel the chance to speak. Emily watched in silence, her heart aching for the family she had just discovered and the deep divide between them. Rachel's hands shook as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I had you, I was so afraid. Mark had left me. I didn't know how I was going to raise 2 children on my own. And when I saw you both, I knew people would talk. They would ask questions I couldn't answer. I was weak. I thought giving you up would protect you. I was wrong." Kayla's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was still cold. "You didn't give me up to protect me. You gave me up to protect yourself." Rachel's breath hitched in her throat. Kayla's words were like a mirror, reflecting the truth she had been too afraid to admit. She had made a selfish choice, one that had haunted her every day since. "I'm so sorry," Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. "I know I can never take it back, but I've thought about you every day. I've wondered about you, prayed for you. I've always loved you." Kayla looked away, her hands clenched into fists. "You say that now, but you didn't love me enough to keep me."
Hey there, quick message. Grab a paper, write down HeroKind Stories, our channel name. Come back soon, we've got incredible stories you won't want to miss.
The tension in the room grew unbearable, the silence thick with unspoken pain. Emily, unable to stand it any longer, spoke up. "Wait, there's something else," she said, her voice barely steady. "I need to know something. If you loved your mom, why didn't you ever try to find her?" Rachel's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I was afraid," she admitted. "I thought she'd hate me. I thought she'd be better off without me in her life." Emily shook her head. "But you kept me. You didn't give me away." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Rachel's voice faltered. There was no escaping the truth now. "You're right. I kept you because you looked like me, because I thought it would be easier." Kayla's face twisted in pain. "So it really was about the color of my skin," she said, her voice filled with betrayal. "You gave me up because I didn't fit your perfect little picture." Rachel shook her head furiously. "No, it wasn't about that, at least not in the way you think. I was scared of what people would say, of how they'd treat you. I thought I was protecting you from a world that wasn't ready for us." Kayla stood up again, the pain in her eyes unbearable to witness. "You didn't protect me, Rachel. You abandoned me." Emily stood, her emotions overwhelming her. "I don't know how to process all of this," she said, her voice breaking. "But I know one thing. Kayla's right. You can't just make decisions like this and expect it all to be okay." She turned to Kayla, tears in her eyes. "I want to know you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't care about the past. I just want to know you now." Kayla's expression softened for the first time. She looked at Emily, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something, hope, maybe, in her eyes. But it was quickly replaced by the walls she had built around herself. "I don't know if I can do that," Kayla said softly, her voice full of doubt. Rachel could feel everything slipping away. Her daughters, the 2 people she loved most in the world, were slipping through her fingers, and she didn't know how to stop it. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice desperate. "I know I can't undo it, but please don't let it destroy us. We can still have a future together." Kayla shook her head, her voice cold. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She turned to leave, her body stiff with pain and anger. Emily reached out to stop her, but Kayla pulled away. "I need time," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, either of you." Rachel sat at the cafe table long after Kayla had walked away, her heart shattered into pieces. Emily stood beside her, silent, her emotions too raw to form words. The truth was out, but it hadn't brought them together. If anything, it felt like it had only driven them further apart. The cafe was nearly empty now, the staff cleaning tables and preparing to close for the night. Emily finally spoke, her voice quiet and filled with uncertainty. "What happens now?" Rachel looked up at her daughter, the pain in her chest nearly unbearable. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know if she'll ever forgive me." Emily sat down beside her, the weight of everything settling in. "I don't know if I can either," she said softly. The betrayal still stung, learning that her mother had kept something so life-altering from her for all these years. But there was also another part of her that couldn't bear to see her mother in this much pain. "I made the wrong choice," Rachel admitted, her voice trembling, "and now I'm paying for it." Emily stared down at the table, her mind racing. "Maybe she just needs time," she said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "She's angry, hurt, but maybe that'll change." Rachel nodded, though the fear in her heart told her otherwise. The damage had been done, and she had no idea how to fix it. Kayla walked through the quiet streets, her thoughts swirling with anger and confusion. Her entire life had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. The mother she had never known, the sister she had never met, it was all too much. She thought about Rachel's apology, about her explanation. It hadn't felt like enough. How could words undo the years of abandonment, the feeling of being unwanted? Yet, there was something in Rachel's eyes that had stayed with her, something that looked like genuine regret. Kayla's adoptive parents had been loving, supportive, and had given her a good life, but she had always felt the absence of her biological family like an open wound. Now that she knew the truth, the wound felt deeper than ever. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a message from Emily. "Emily, I'm sorry about today. I don't know what to say, but I really want to get to know you. Can we talk?" Kayla stared at the message for a long time. She didn't know if she was ready to let Emily in. But part of her, a small part, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity, and maybe hope. A few weeks passed with little contact between the three women. Rachel and Emily returned to their lives, though the air between them was thick with unresolved tension. Every time Emily looked at her mother, she saw the pain of betrayal, but she also saw the deep sadness Rachel carried. It wasn't easy to reconcile the two, and their relationship remained strained. Then one afternoon, Emily received a message she hadn't expected. It was from Kayla. "Kayla, I've been thinking about what you said. I'm not ready to meet up again, but maybe we can talk." Emily's heart leaped at the message. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She quickly replied, her fingers shaking with excitement. "Emily, I'd love that." "Whenever you're ready," Emily immediately called her mother, her voice filled with cautious optimism. "Mom, she messaged me. Kayla wants to talk." Rachel's heart raced. "What did she say?" "She said she's not ready to meet, but she's willing to talk. That's something, right?" Rachel's voice trembled with emotion. Yes, that's something." A flicker of hope began to grow in her chest, though she knew the road ahead was long and uncertain. Over the next several weeks, Emily and Kayla began talking more frequently, their conversations tentative at first, but slowly growing deeper. They shared stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their frustrations. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the pain of the past resurfaced, but there was also a slow rebuilding of trust. Rachel stayed on the sidelines, afraid to push too hard, but grateful for every small step her daughters took toward one another. She knew that her relationship with Kayla would take much longer to mend, if it ever did. But for now, she was content knowing that Emily and Kayla were building something, even if she wasn't fully a part of it yet. One evening, Emily showed Rachel a picture on her phone, an old photo of the two of them when Emily was just a baby. "I sent this to Kayla," Emily said softly. "She said she doesn't have any baby pictures. I thought she might like to see this." Rachel's throat tightened as she looked at the picture. "What did she say?" Emily smiled faintly. "She said she wishes she had been there." Rachel's heart ached at those words. She wished the same thing. Months passed before Kayla finally agreed to meet Rachel again. It wasn't the warm reunion Rachel had dreamed of, but it was a start. They met at the same cafe, though this time there was no explosive confrontation, just a quiet, tense conversation between two women trying to find their way back to one another. "I'm not ready to forgive you," Kayla said bluntly, her eyes fixed on the table. Rachel nodded, her hands shaking as she clasped them together. I understand. I don't expect you to. Kayla looked up, her expression softening just a little. But I'm willing to try, for Emily's sake, and maybe for mine. Rachel's heart swelled with hope, but she kept her emotions in check. That's all I can ask for. The road ahead was far from easy, but for the first time in years, Rachel allowed herself to believe that healing was possible. She knew that rebuilding trust with Kayla would take time, perhaps years, but she was willing to wait. She was willing to do whatever it took to mend the family she had once torn apart. Emily, for her part, continued to strengthen her relationship with Kayla, slowly bridging the gap between the past and the present. There were still difficult days, moments when the pain of what had been lost resurfaced, but there were also moments of joy, of laughter, of connection. As Rachel watched her daughters finally together, finally talking, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't perfect, and it would never erase the choices she had made. But it was something. It was hope. And for now, that was enough. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share it with others. Stories like these remind us of the power of love, resilience, and the long journey toward forgiveness. If you'd like to hear more stories of faith and determination, click on the video on your screen now. You won't want to miss what's next.